Time for our rising crisis update. We'll begin with a number of coronavirus cases here in the United States and around the world. So here in the United States, we have 1,165,300 cases. That's an increase of 89,000 cases since Friday. The total number of deaths stands at 67,785. That's 4,676 additional deaths since Friday, and then 3.4 million cases worldwide, 247,567 deaths. So you can see, Krystal, with the 67,000 figure that the president of the administration a couple of months ago had said, hey, 60,000, 65,000, with the, that looks like because of social distancing, that's what we've ended up with. Now that number looking at 67,000, we don't exactly know what the upper bound of that is. Now the president's saying maybe 75, 80, 90,000. That's a lot of deaths. And unfortunately, it bears Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci's predictions way earlier that 100 to 200,000 deaths is what looked likely, and that looks very much, the 100,000 number seems like something we could easily surpass and go over.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is certainly the case. And look, there's some indications that these numbers are actually undercounted. Mm-hmm. There's also new reporting about just explaining the difference between the way that flu deaths are counted versus these. Look, these deaths are all very much directly linked to coronavirus.
Right.
With the flu, they use statistical modeling to find sort of excess deaths and then extrapolate which one of those are caused by the flu. So it's not an apples and apples comparison. The flu deaths may be overstated. These deaths are likely understated. So just when you're hearing that sort of rhetoric out there, that's an important thing to keep in mind. But yeah, approaching 70,000 deaths at this point, and you see those numbers continuing to go up. Very, very troubling. And there's a new study that is also very concerning out of the University of Minnesota saying that it may take 2 years for this pandemic to be contained. And look, I mean, our goal here is just to really set expectations, give you the best information possible. But essentially what they did is went back and looked historically at different pandemics and what the shape of those curves looked like. They found, very common that, as we've been talking about here, to have a spike about 6 months on, where you see a resurgence, and that it takes that long for us to achieve that herd immunity, somewhere around 70% of the population having some level of immunity, before you can really get this thing contained and get it under control. And of course, we don't even know at this point if people who have had it are actually immune, or if they are, how long does that immunity last? We just don't know that at this point.
I have no information about it. It's really concerning. I mean, and as you said, as far as modern medicine has advanced with novel viruses like these, there's just not that much you can do. It's pretty much, we're almost in the same straits as we were in 1919. We've learned a few lessons, but not all that many. At the same time, the administration is really, is really coming out there and outrightly saying that China not only responsible for the covering up the coronavirus, but that the virus itself is likely, according to these senior officials, have emanated from that Wuhan bioweapons laboratory, not intentionally, but that in the process of having an animal infected with the virus destroyed, that it was passed on to a worker at that laboratory who went out and spread it in the general population. Now, that does come somewhat contrary to what senior intelligence leaders had put out in a statement saying that we don't know, but it could have come from natural causes or not. But Secretary Pompeo, former CIA director as well, talked about this over the weekend on the Sunday shows. Let's take a listen.
And Mr. Secretary, have you seen anything that gives you high confidence that it originated in that Wuhan lab?
Martha, there's enormous evidence that that's where this began. We've said from the beginning that this was a virus that originated in Wuhan, China. We took a lot of grief for that from the outset, but I think the whole world can see now. Remember, China has a history of infecting the world, and they have a history of running substandard laboratories. These are not the first times that we've had a world exposed to viruses as a result of failures in a Chinese lab. And so while the intelligence committee continues to do its work, they should continue to do that and verify so that we are certain. I can tell you that there is a significant amount of evidence that this came from that laboratory in Wuhan.
So you can see that the Secretary Pompeo is laying it very much at the feet of the Chinese, and he's using unequivocal rhetoric whenever he's talking about this, saying that there was enormous evidence that this virus came from that Wuhan laboratory. Very much could set up the stage for a geopolitical clash between the two, because the growing evidence whether it came from the lab or not, it seems to be that part of the reason why the Chinese downplayed it so much in the beginning, A, to avoid blame, B, was to really stockpile all of available medical supplies around the world.
So that other countries wouldn't buy it up.
Yeah, because they knew it was going to go elsewhere, so they wanted to pile it all up for themselves. And it was only after that time that we got real transparency around this. And you can see the Chinese government is very sensitive to these accusations. Their propaganda campaign ramping up against Secretary Pompeo, against Steve Bannon, actually this morning, putting him on full blast to the entire nation of China, saying that they're fear mongers and all of that. And I think this is going to be one of the lasting legacies of coronavirus.
And from a left or Democratic perspective, you can acknowledge two things, right? You can acknowledge that there was a cover-up here, that it may have originated out of the lab, whether it did or not. Certainly in the early days, we got very little information. Some reports of the World Health Organization helped to quash that information flow coming out. Like, you can say that China handled this terribly and also have a critique of this administration, and also recognize that part of their fixation on China is an attempt to blame shift and make the election about that rather than the early days of this response. But to deny this part and to deny the importance of those early days in it ultimately becoming a pandemic is, just to really put blinders on and ignore the facts that are emerging more and more.
It would just be very foolish. And look, the people look like fools when they're like, oh, China did everything possible. It's like, okay, you want to stand on that ground, you know you're going to look like an idiot. So we'll continue to keep you updated on that story. As always, keep a lot of skepticism, both in the numbers worldwide, here in the United States, and anything coming out of the intelligence community. Don't ever just believe it. We should demand the evidence.
Indeed. So, please like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss any of our updates or the show. Have a great day. We'll have another crisis update for you here tomorrow.